My name is Becky, and I'm the Executive Director of the Rainforest Action Network. And as Kristen said, I worked with ISAC for many years. It was where I found where the roots of my activism are, sort of what formed really the deepest understanding of the way the global economy works, which really influences how I work today. I want to talk about the environmental impacts of globalization. I'm going to do that by talking about the palm oil industry and industrial agriculture more broadly. How many people here are familiar with palm oil as a commodity? Well, that's good because it's in about 50% of all manufactured goods in US supermarkets today. And that's a tremendous growth from just 10 years ago. Well, actually from about 6 years ago. And about 90% of all palm oil is manufactured in Indonesia. So that's in Malaysia and in Indonesia. And so there's a huge amount coming from one very small part of the world. And that part of the world is also the home to some of the last remaining natural rainforests in the world, which are a very important life support system for this planet that are rapidly disappearing. So to start off, I'm going to tell a story about a day in the life of our organization, and one of the things that happened that connects us very closely to what's happening in Indonesia and the spread of palm oil plantations there. We were all sitting, we're based in San Francisco, and we are in the middle of the financial district, and as one does in a day of work, it was a rainy day, and we're all sitting slaving away over our computers, as is most of the work of saving the world, it seems, these days. And a call came in from our allies in Indonesia and a small community there who are rainforest dependent that we've worked with over the years, and they said, we have a really big problem. They live in the rainforest, they're dependent on the rainforest, and that day, a large agriculture conglomerate called IOI had started bulldozing their ancestral lands to grow a palm oil plantation. And when they got in touch with us, they said, we don't know what to do. We went out, we stood in front of the bulldozers, we're doing everything we can, and nobody knows this is happening, and what can you do to help? So as you can imagine, this caused, we all huddled in the conference room to sit and figure out how are we going to help this community. We couldn't get on planes and fly to Indonesia. We could, but that was going to take us 2 or 3 days, and even if we were there, what were we going to be able to do? So after some discussion, we decided that one of the most important things we could do was tell their story. So we immediately got them the tools to take pictures, tell their story, we got quotes, we got it out to the media, we made sure that the story of what was happening, what IOI was doing, this company was doing in that community was being told in the Indonesian press, in the UK press, and around the world. Most of you might not have noticed it, but our aim in doing this was to make sure that IOI's customers in the United States saw what was happening. Because the second thing we did is we got on the phone with the customers that buy from IOI, which include Cargill, Safeway, Kraft, all of whom we have a relationship with, which is another conversation, and said varying degrees of love between us. And we said, look, you guys have a problem on your hands. There's a company that you do business with in Indonesia that at this very moment is bulldozing rainforests illegally on ancestral lands. And not only is that a tremendous impact on the rainforest, the wildlife there, the biodiversity, but those communities, it's a human rights violation. And we, as expected, got very varying degrees of responses from those companies. Cargill ignored us, which is not a great surprise. Also another story. Kraft said, oh shit, I think actually is what they said. And they immediately put their contract with IOI on hold. And Safeway called IOI and said, if you guys don't do something about this, we're going to have to stop doing business with you because we can't afford our customers. It's happening, right? It's a great story. And so IOI actually got kicked out of the RSPO, or their membership in the RSPO, which is the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, which it's arguable they never should have been in it in the first place, but they got their membership put on hold, which, and again, this is another story, it's very difficult to get your membership in the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil put on hold because it's an industry standard that's not terribly strong, but they did get put on hold, and so they were no longer able to market that way, and the deforestation in that community stopped, and IOI is now under investigation, and it was a great victory in that moment. Yay. But I think that the real question here is, and the community thanked us, and we said we're on hold, we'll do whatever we need to, and we're basically staying in communication with them to see, when they need us again, what we can do. Great. But how many communities is this happening in Indonesia that are reaching out? How many communities are there around the world where this is happening every day that have no access to the media, have no access to Safeway or Kraft to be able to help them to stop this? And what is it that gives these companies the kind of power to be able to come in and bulldoze these communities, to bulldoze the rainforest. We realize this is a victory, but it's really a firefighting victory. It's only a very small moment of stopping, which is essentially a big steamroller, which is rolling over all of our native rainforests around the world and all other ecosystems and communities around the world. So what I want to talk about is what is behind this, what allows this to happen, and what do we actually have to do to change the structures that enable this kind of devastation and this kind of power dynamic that is antithetical to life and to community. So at the very basic, obviously we know the rules of the economy are rigged in favor of the large global transnational corporations like IOI, like Cargill, and against the small and the local farmers, whether they're Indonesia and the US. These big companies have access to free land, low taxes, major subsidies. They don't pay the true price or any price at all for the loss of wildlife, whether it's a legal price or an economic price. And so basically the whole game is set up to benefit them and to disincentivize small scale and local agriculture. Take Cargill, for example. They control 20 to 25% of the global palm oil trade. And they could be IOI. In this story, it happened to be IOI. IOI sells to Cargill, and Cargill also has plantations in Indonesia. They're one of the biggest companies there. They're the largest importer of palm oil into the United States. And they've gained as much control as they have over this trade, starting with development. I mean, it's got its roots even further back than that, but largely starting with development. There was a huge push by the international development banks to give not just Indonesian government, including the Indonesian government, vast amounts of money to invest in export-oriented agriculture to create large-scale private plantations. They gave huge subsidies to the big exporters. They gave them free land. In fact, they gave land away that wasn't theirs to give. They gave the land, like the ancestral lands that we were talking with our friends about just earlier in the story. And then again, the process continued with the creation of the WTO, the Agreement on Agriculture, which, surprise, surprise, was actually written by a vice president of Cargill. So you can imagine the perspective that he was putting into that very document, which was all about opening up southern markets, incentivizing transitioning from subsistence agriculture to export-oriented agriculture. This is a story that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. It's a story that it's happening all over the world, happened all over the world in a very similar process. And the communities in Indonesia were either forced to themselves transition to export-oriented agriculture and become a part of this system, selling to the big exporters, or to watch their land stolen and taken from them. And so many of them went into the system. Here in the US, we saw the same situation. Cargill, again, is a company that puts vast amounts of money into lobbying. They spent $1.5 million on lobbying last year for things like subsidies on ethanol and for, surprise, surprise, Indonesian foreign investment policy. So they're very active, trying to make sure the rules of the game are in their favor so that they can get what they need in Indonesia, but also what they need here in the United States. They pay low taxes. They took the state of Massachusetts to court to lower their corporate tax rate by 1%, which I know sounds like maybe that's not such a big deal, but most of you probably also know that corporate tax rates in the United States are not terribly high in the first place. And Cargill is constantly on the offensive trying to get their corporate tax rates lower. The state of Iowa gave them a $600,000 tax break and a $2 million loan, half of which they immediately forgave in 2010. So these big companies are investing a huge amount in rigging the system, and that's helping them to have a huge profit margin to enable them to be controlling the grain trade. 1 minute, Kristen. Oh no. Well, I could go on and on about Cargill, so I'll cut that part short. One irony of all this is, who wants palm oil anyways? Most of us don't want it in our food. We don't want it in our shampoo. Well, ironically enough, it's being marketed as a healthy alternative because we had the trans fat labeling law, and suddenly everybody wanted palm oil because it doesn't have trans fats. Big irony is that palm oil is actually not healthy for us physically, nor is it healthy for the environment, as we see what's happening in Indonesia. Indonesia, I'll just give you a quick sense of what's happening to the rainforest. Indonesian rainforest, the country is less than 1% of the land area of the world and has more than 10% of plant species, 12% of mammal species, and 17% of bird species on the planet. It's disappearing. The rainforest has disappeared by half in the last 50 years, and palm oil production is going to double by 2020 if this continues moving. Not only that, there's 50 million indigenous people currently living in rainforest Indonesia and dependent on it and having knowledge of the rainforest that nobody else in the world has. That's going to enable us to transition in the way that Richard was talking about into a kind of local economy, in a way of living in harmony with nature that really we're not going to be able to do just sitting and thinking in our offices in downtown San Francisco in front of our computers to build a better world. So I want to bring this back to saying, what can we do? Of course, I truly believe that it's very important to be doing the kind of firefighting that Rand did in the case of that community in Indonesia. But we also have to be, every day, working to change the structures that enable companies like Cargill, like IOI, to have the kind of control they have in the global economy. That means addressing the trade regulations that they have control over, essentially. It means looking at their lobbying dollars. It means taking a really hard look at every place and revealing every place where these companies are actually taking over our democracy. It also means supporting those communities around the world where alternatives already exist, where they haven't been destroyed. It means working with communities like the ones that we do in Indonesia, who are living and subsisting in the rainforest and doing everything we can to support their livelihoods the way they are right now. And it also means building alternatives there, here, supporting farmers here, supporting farmers in Indonesia, and ensuring that everything we do involves both this capacity to resist, but also to renew. That's something that, a phrase that Helena has used for her whole career, and one that I learned from her, and it is something that I carry with me and I think is very important for all of us to take out of this room and into the world, that everything we do has to involve this quality of resisting the current system and renewing a new one. Thank you very much.